Welcome back to Photography Discourse. We talked a little bit about the Z8 last time, and this time I thought we would take a different direction and talk about some Nikon Z lenses, some of the glass, and the new Z mount and what's significant about that. But a little bit of history before that. So Nikon in the past used to differentiate their professional line lenses from their prosumer or consumer line lenses basically based on f-stop. So especially in the wide to semi-telephoto range. So we're talking 20 millimeter approximately through maybe 105, but 85 or so, something like that. And in the past, those lenses, there was duplicates of those lenses made. In, for example, for the F mount in the G line of lenses, there were duplicates of those. You had 24, 20 millimeter 1.8. I'm not sure if they made a 1.4 of that, but there was a 24 millimeter 1.8, but also a 24 millimeter 1.4. And there was a 35 millimeter 1.8, but also a 35 millimeter 1.4, etc. And in the past, the differentiation was if it's 1.8, it's more of a consumer, prosumer lens. And if it's 1.4, it's more of a professional lens, which meant better build quality, better aberration control, and better coatings and better IQ. And that's how it was with Nikon. That's the way we understood it. So in the past, the 1.4 line lenses were also much more expensive, obviously. Most of them were $1,500 or more, whereas the 1.8 lenses were generally like sub $800, and the Nifty 50 was as low as 200 or so. But as a result, Nikon users have become accustomed to this differentiation, which means they look at lenses that way, in that if it's a 1.8, it must be a lower level of lens, a lower quality lens in IQ, in build, etc., etc. And if it's a 1.4 or something like that, then it's a pro line lens and would be better in those respects. And so that's something that's been built into the Nikon psyche a little bit, I think. And Nikon changed the game a little bit with the Z lenses because they've decided to go the route of giving a designation to professional lenses, which is S line. And this S line designation stands for, I don't know, I heard that it stood for something like superior or something like that, and that may well be, I don't know. But basically, it indicates a certain level of build quality, of coatings on the lens, of aberration control, of breathing control, focus breathing control to an extent, and of course the top level of IQ. And so this is something that's not new in the camera world. Canon's been doing this for a long time with their L line lenses, and I think Canon users are very used to that distinction between L line lenses and other lenses. But again, Nikon users really aren't. And I do remember when the Z6 and 7 first came out, and they did a big marketing push explaining the new Z mount to the Nikon world, and explaining how the mount was very special because it had a very wide mouth of 55 millimeters and a very short flange distance of 16 millimeters, which put it at sort of an advantage to the other mounts. The Canon RF mounts 54 millimeter mouth and a 20 millimeter flange distance, so we have a 20% closer flange distance on the Nikon than the Canon. And the Sony mount has a very small mouth at 48 millimeters and an 18 millimeter flange distance. So in all respects, the Z mount itself is a superior mount to the other mounts from a physics standpoint of literally of space and all the ramifications of what that means. For example, the Z mount can mount any other lens. There could be an adapter made to mount an RF lens or an E mount lens to a Z camera, but not in the reverse. And that will never be the case because of the physics. But I do remember back at the time when they made this big marketing push about the Z mount, and they were explaining it, and they were telling about how they could make new lens designs and very fast lens designs. And I was very excited to get fast glass, and as a portrait photographer, I like the shallow depth of field, not exclusively, but often it has a place and it does create a unique look. And we were looking for that kind of stuff and hoping for 1.2 lenses and things that were even faster than the old f-mount lenses at 1.4. And I remember being excited about that. And then the first two prime lenses that came out were the 35 1.8 S lens and the 50 millimeter 1.8 S lens. And I remember being quite disappointed at the time, thinking that's very strange. Like, these are not professional lenses. They're bringing out 1.8s. Again, operating on the old paradigm, believing that 1.8 meant lower level, not realizing that S line is what actually designates the better quality lenses for Nikon now. But also just, God, they're kind of slow. I mean, 1.8's not that slow, honestly. 1.8's reasonably fast, but not by the standards of what we were expecting given all the hype surrounding the Z mount. So I remember being kind of disappointed and wondering what was going on. And also, these lenses were quite expensive compared to the G mount, the analogous G mount, or excuse me, the analogous F mount lenses, the G line. Some of these lenses were $200 and $300, well, around $200 more, which seemed like a lot because it seemed like Nikon might be gouging us for these lenses. But it turns out in retrospect, actually none of that is the case. Nothing really could be farther from the truth, in fact. These 1.8 lenses, these S-line 1.8 lenses, are fully professional lenses in every respect. They have great build quality, they have great aberration control, great breathing control, they have coatings, and they also have great IQ. So that particular issue, these 1.8s are professional lenses. The only thing that they don't have is the 2/3 extra stop of light from 1.4, or in the case of 1.2, the stop and a half. So that's the only thing. But besides that, the light letting in capacity, in every other way, these are pro lenses. It's literally a line of professional 1.8 lenses. And it's an important point to see that because I have the full line. Like, if we take a look at them here, like, just to give an example. So this is what we're talking about. Here's the 20. Let's see if we can get it to focus. Oh, there we go. It looks like that. So if I was a 20 millimeter 1.8S, the 24 millimeter is the one I'm actually shooting with right now, so I can't show it. Here's the 35. Let's see if we can get it to focus in on it. I don't know. Maybe not. It's set for face right now, so there we go. Maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just too close to the lens. That's probably true. Here's the 50. Yep. And the 85. Something else you'll notice about these lenses, if you can see them well enough, is that they're quite light, or they're small and light. This is the 85, not too big, holding it in one hand. Here's the 50, even smaller in one hand. 35 is about the same size as the 50, and they're quite light. They're small and light. They're easy to manipulate and get around. Now, if we look at the pricing from the old F mounts, the 20 millimeter 1.8 G lens, which by all accounts was quite a good lens. People used it for astro and a lot of things. That lens is selling right now for $799.95, so $800. Whereas the 20 millimeter 1.8 S lens you can get right now for $946.95. So the actual delta of the two is $147. The Z mount S lens is definitely a higher quality lens than the F mount lens. It's definitely worth $147 more, and it's in every respect better. The same can be said for the 24 millimeter 1.8 G to the 24 millimeter 1.8 S. Again, the delta right now, the G lens, or the F mount G lens, is going for $676.95. And the S lens is going, Z mount S lens is going for $896.95. So that's a $220 difference, totally worth it. The 35 millimeter 1.8 G for the Nikon F mount is going right now for $476.95, and the Z mount 35 1.8 S is going for $696.95 on sale. That's a $220 difference. The Z mount S line lens is much better and competes with the old 1.4s. Same can be said for the 50. The 50 millimeter a little different. The nifty 50 on the old system, the f-mount 1.8G 50 millimeter lens, was quite inexpensive. You can get it now for like $196.95, so about $200. And the 50 millimeter 1.8S is much more expensive at $526.95. So the difference is $330. In this case, the difference is well worth it. The 50 millimeter, if you can see it here again, the 50 millimeter 1.8, out of the way, 1.8 S lens. This particular lens is a phenomenal lens. It punches way above its weight. You can see all kinds of YouTube reviews on this from just about every person who's ever reviewed it. This lens stands up against $2,000 lenses easily, and it has almost no focus breathing, and it's very controlled, and it's very sharp, and it just smokes the f-mount lenses, and it smokes most of the other lenses from other companies. Other 51.8s are not even close to this. It might be the best 51.8 that there is, potentially. I can't say that definitively, but it certainly would compete on that level and be in the conversation. It goes pretty much fairly head-to-head, even with Nikon's own 50 millimeter 1.2 S lens, with the exception of the stop and a half of light and some extreme corner edge sharpness. It's basically just as good with those two exceptions, and you can, I have both of those lenses. I use them both regularly. I haven't done the testing, but Ricci from Ricci Talks did this testing about a year or two ago, and you can watch his video on that where he compares the two, and it's just phenomenal how good this lens is. It's well worth the $526 price tag. It probably should sell for more. It's definitely a value that's way above that. If you're someone who says, well, but then there's no cheap lens, like Canon has its nifty 50-1.8 for the RF mount for like $150, $200. And that's true, but then I would say get the 40 millimeter f2 lens from Nikon for Z mount. It's not an S lens, but it's exceptional. It's got great quality. It's f2 and great IQ and doesn't focus breathe almost at all. And the Canon, by the way, the Canon RF 1.8 focus breathes terribly. But the Nikon 40 millimeter doesn't focus breathe at all. It's an excellent lens, and you can get it for like $250. So it's like $75-100 more than the Canon, and it's well worth that amount more. It's a much better lens. So, and the same could be going on. The 85 millimeter f-mount 1.8G lens is selling for $426.95 right now. And then the 85 1.8 S lens for Z mount is $695.95. So the difference is $270. Again, well worth it. This 85 millimeter lens 1.8 is exceptionally sharp. It's an incredible lens. It's really an excellent 1.8 85 optic, and it can be used for all kinds of stuff, events and portraiture, what have you. It's a professional 1.8 line lens. It's significantly better than the f-mount. So basically, they've provided us these 5 lenses: the 20, the 24, the 35, the 50, and the 85. This is a comprehensive line of 1.8 Pro lenses for very reasonable prices. Prices that are a couple $100 at most above what the old consumer lens price was for the same thing. And these are significantly better across the board in every measurable metric. So this notion that Nikon was being greedy or like charging too much for its lenses was really the misunderstanding of understanding what the lenses that they were actually providing us were. They weren't, if you compare it apples to apples, it looked that way, but these are not apples to apples. This is apples to orange comparison for sure. So the only thing that you're actually sacrificing on these 1.8s is the 2/3 of a stop of light compared to a 1.4, or the 1.5 stops compared to a 1.2. But what you're getting is a much smaller and lighter lens. So I'm a portrait photographer and an wedding photographer and events. So I find myself, I have 2 different use cases. And I find that when I do portraiture, I don't mind heavy lenses and lots of weight, and I'm not lugging lenses and cameras around all day long. So I actually don't mind having heavier and bigger lenses. And for portraiture and my stuff like that, I use my 51.2 S lens. I also use the Nikkor 105 1.4 E lens for f-mount adapted. And I also use the Tamron 35 millimeter 1.4 lens, SP lens, which is an exceptional 35 millimeter lens. However, when the 85 1.2 S lens comes out, hopefully in the next couple of months, and the 35 1.2 S lens comes out, I will be getting those, and they may well replace, well, the 35 may well replace my Tamron, we'll have to see. So I do use these faster lenses for my portraiture, but I don't have to. These other 1.8s would totally suffice. It's just a choice I make because I do want shallower depth of field often. So it's part of the look that I go for in many instances, but not all. But I will say my use case for event photography is quite different. If I'm lugging a camera, like two camera bodies around all day long, 8, 12 hours, and I'm going to have two lenses, one or different lenses, but I'm going to have one lens permanently attached to one and one to the other. These primes, I don't really want to lug around that 51.2. It's quite large and heavy, and for a whole day of shooting, although it's exceptional and it would create amazing results, it just isn't worth the trade-off for me. And the 51.8 is so exceptional and so much smaller and lighter, and so close in quality, like virtually as good in every way with that one exception, that I would prefer using it. And I find myself using the 35 millimeter 1.8 at events all the time, the 50 millimeter 1.8 at events. The 85 1.8 millimeter at events is awesome for the long shots, like shooting the dance floor from a distance on first dance, things like that. And even the 24 that I'm shooting with right now is great for wider stuff, and even the 20 for some very wide stuff on, it's more of a niche lens, but still. These 5 lenses are really an excellent arsenal, and you can do anything with them, including portraiture, if you want to. I could absolutely get away with using these for my portraiture, and it would be fine. It's just a choice. But so for the budget photographer, this line of lenses, it seems expensive at first glance, at first blush, but actually it's quite inexpensive for the value. These lenses are second to none, and they are exceptional. And they just put out a new firmware actually this last week for all of them, which has to do with making linear focusing. It's a focus by wire system, so it's not the focus mechanism isn't mechanically engaged to the lens mechanism, but they've added firmware to make it so you can do linear pulls. So they're making these lenses even better because they're becoming even more adept for doing, like, I would say for cinema use or video use, where you can focus pull and have like specific points that you can pull from. So these lenses are really becoming comprehensively excellent, like across the board for all usages. And I just think this is an important point to get out there, because this notion that the Z mount, well, and I'll say the Z mount has allowed this to happen because the Z mount has given them the ability to make these lenses reasonably small and light and yet be so phenomenal in IQ and in all the controls that they have, the aberration controls, etc. So we are seeing the benefit of the Z mount in these 1.8 lenses, not measured by ultra wide apertures, but measured by size, weight, and quality, and extreme quality. So anyway, I think they're an extreme value for what they are. And the notion that 1.8 is no longer, or rather the notion that 1.8 is not professional and 1.8 lenses are substandard lenses, or I shouldn't say substandard because the other old ones were actually pretty good, but the notion that they are somehow not adequate for professional use, or for any use for that matter, is false. These lenses are top notch, and I recommend them highly to anyone who is either is on a budget or just wants smaller and lighter lenses, or both. And I will be also getting the 1.2 versions. I have the 51.2. I've shot with it for a long time. I will be getting the 85.1.2. I will be getting the 35.1.2. I will not be getting rid of my 1.8 versions. I will use them for events going forward. I probably will continue to use them for events long after I have the 1.2s, because they're that good and they're that convenient. So anyway, with that, I'll stop talking now, and I just want to say once again, thank you for watching Photography Discourse. I appreciate your viewership, and please ask any questions or make any comments you'd like so I can address any issues that you may have. I also am going to post a few shots just after this, like a gallery of shots showing some shots that have been taken with these lenses, just for the sake of doing so. So anyway, with that, thank you very much for watching. Have a happy holiday, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.